Thank you for joining us. We'll just wait 30 seconds, a minute or so in case anybody is just waiting to join us, and then we'll begin. Thank you very much for joining us for the last of our Worcestershire Treasures talks. This is part of Worcestershire Treasures. Also had a Worcester Treasures at the start of those. So that's 25 items out of, I think it was about 50 to 60 of their original series that were nominated about 8 or 9 years ago. So welcome if this is the first one that you've come to, and also if you've been joining us either on Wednesday lunchtimes or else that you've been catching up afterwards. We hope that you've been enjoying these. So my name's Paul. I work for the Worcestershire Archive and Archaeology Service as a Learning and Outreach Manager, helping to coordinate our events, activities, workshops, talks. Quite often go out to give talks to local groups and societies, and so we're able to fortunately put some of these online and to share them more widely, whilst we've been a bit more restricted in what we can do. So I said, welcome to our Worcestershire Treasures talk, part 4, part of our lunchtime, short lunchtime talk series. I said we are Worcestershire Archive and Archaeology Service. We're based in the Hive, although we are a county-wide service and occasionally go beyond as well. We have the archive, which is the 12 miles of documents about the county's history. And we're also the Diocesan Record Office, our good core of what we have, our records from the parishes and the diocese. We have the local studies library in the Hive as well, several thousand books all about the county's history. And the archaeology side, the field section, the people who go out and dig, as well as those members of staff who are looking at the finds and environmental stuff back in the Hive and writing the reports, the curatorial advisors who look at planning applications to see how they'd be affected by potential development and what needs to be taken into account, and advising on how to care for the environment, and the historic environment record, a database of over 80,000 records, and people come to see us or get in touch to find out about that information. So we're quite a diverse service, and did all contributing to this series when we first put it on our blog 8 or 9 years ago. I will briefly say, please, if you can fill in our customer survey, which runs until the 4th of July, you can there's a link on our blog, there's an article about it that we put up a few days, a week or so ago, or else the bit.ly link, I'll put those will be on the YouTube descriptions if you want to look at those. That'd be fantastic to help us with us going forward and knowing what people think about us, what they value, what they get out of it. That'd be fantastic if you can do that. So this series originated on our blog back late in 2013 and carried on for another year, and it was an opportunity a year or so after coming together to form the joint service of people contributing and providing what they thought was a treasure. Now, we have defined it quite widely. There is very, very, very little gold or silver or precious objects, but we said interpreted quite widely about what we consider a treasure and what is important to our service, our for customers, the information, the things that we have. So people from right across the service contributed, as well as some of our users. So we've got quite a diverse coverage of what we had. The word treasures, we hadn't realised that at the time, but that's part of the origins of our archaeology service, because very early on, a document was produced, Worcestershire Countryside Treasures, which is a forerunner of the HER, listing historic rural sites and providing details of those. So moving on to 5 ones that I've selected out of the 50 to 60 that were nominated, to explain a little bit more about those. And starting off, the archaeological investigations on the Kempsey flood alleviation scheme. Bit of a mouthful. Now, a lot of the archaeology that we undertake is in advance of development. Occasionally people think that we just pick wherever we want and just go and do it, but our field section is externally funded, so we only get money from developers or somebody else who will pay for us to dig, and normally that is in advance of development. And one example is the Kempsey flood alleviation scheme and the infrastructure around that. And because as part of the desk-based assessment, as part of the preparation, we knew that there was potentially going to be archaeology disturbed. It was built in that our archaeologists would go and have a look and record what was there. We knew that around there in a floodplain was an Iron Age hill fort, was an Iron Age fort, sorry. A Saxon minster is documented from 799 AD. Bishop's Palace 868, which until it was demolished in the 17th century. The present church from the 12th century, and there could be other things as well. So we knew that there was things potentially there that's to record, but you don't necessarily know what you're going to get until you start digging. So we investigated, and there's a picture of some of my colleagues hard at work, and we uncovered a graveyard. 55 to be were uncovered. Now, when we come across bodies, they are treated with the utmost respect. There are strict laws and rules about what happens. We need to inform the Home Office. Things need to be blocked off. That's why I think we've got those sheets masking the excavations, because these are our ancestors. These are human beings. These are real people. And so we need to treat them with respect. It had been a case that a couple of bodies were discovered in the 1950s by the Worcestershire Archaeological Society in a small trench that they dug near there. And at the time it was thought that these people may have been died during the Battle of Worcester, or connected to the Battle of Worcester. And that's what it put down to. But we now think that they are probably a part of this graveyard, one that was probably forgotten about, because we can see that it was the burials were truncated by a ditch that was sealed by a level with pottery from the 12th and 14th centuries in. And then other soil over it was also sealed by a layer with pottery from 13th to 16th century. Radiocarbon dating was done as well on 4 of the of the burials, which went to 870 to 980 and 1040 to 1260 AD. They were the they were what came back. Now we can't be too much more precise than that, but with the other evidence as well, these are probably pre-conquest ones that at some stage had been forgotten about, and hence not part of the current graveyard. Now, there isn't a huge amount of Anglo-Saxon period pre-conquest archaeology discovered in the area, certainly not objects, because often they'd be wooden compared to the Romans, who like to have things out of pottery and more substantial. So it was quite a find. Says image of 2 of the intercutting graves. So we recorded these, and a report was created, and it said it provided a very rare access into a view of this period here, and those bodies. I said they have now been reburied in the churchyard, treated with the utmost respect. But the information and the drawings and the photographs of things that we had at the time go into the report to give us a rare insight into some of the residents of Worcestershire at this particular period. And in 2013, a stone was erected on that site to record the reburial of the Saxon and medieval forebears of that period. As I said, treating those people with respect, and said, but that's the information in the archaeological report gives a rare insight into that particular period, which was why Tom, who was involved with that excavation, managing that, nominated it. Moving about 1,000 years on to more recent times and oral history, and we have quite a few oral history collections. This is where we interview people about their life, about their stories for posterity, people who might not think of actually writing things down. We support numerous projects. Maggie, who's one of our archivists, is one of the Oral History Society reps for the area. So we do a lot of advising local groups, in some cases helping them manage projects, and advising what needs to be happening to come into the archives to be most use. And we sometimes carry out our own oral history projects, and this one was nominated by Justin, who was a project officer who was involved in this particular one before the Hive, looking at what was happening on the site of the Hive. We did this whilst it was being built. We wanted, as we are the Archive and Archaeology Service, to look at what can we tell about this space that we are going to be calling home. And Justin managed to get in touch with quite a few people who had connections to the site of the Hive, and to speak to people and get their stories down, which is fantastic, because this is the sort of stuff that, as I said, may not get passed on. It's, you tell family members, but not recorded or written down. So the images in the left and in the centre are Cyril Kale, who was the foreman at the cattle market from 1930 to 1962. And so he chatted to us. And then there's the next ones are the twins, Elsie and Josie, who lived in Netherton Lane, and were there pre-war, growing up, and they had stories about, because they were just the viaduct was right next to them, and they used to wave to the train driver, who used to wave back, and I think he said to like wakey wakey each morning to them. And it was great to hear about life would be a living close in the Joseph Wood timber yard building, about the almshouses, and about the cattle market. As it's all history, I thought it'd be an opportunity to actually play a couple of clips, so hopefully this will work. It did when I was trying it out.
5 o'clock was closing time. A lot of the hauliers, they were waiting for their lorries to come back from delivering. So I used to pop across to the pub, which was the Ewe and Lamb, and I never went in. I used to open the door, and I used to shout into the, come on all you chips, cattle market, 5 o'clock. Of course, they all used to come out to get their sheep out of the market, because they had to pay the lairage on stock. But I never went in. See, the point is, I've been a lifetime teetotal. Never drunk in my life. And it's a sort of a sin for me to go into a pub.
And I'll play another clip from Cyril.
The roundhouse, there was 5 offices in the roundhouse. Mr. Henry Combs, auctioneer, Arthur G. Griffiths, auctioneer, and Bentley Hobbs and Mitten, auctioneers. And the other little office was Jackson's at Porter's Mill. In the centre there was a table, quite a long table, which all the farmers used to use to write their cheques and see the auctioneers. And then, of course, you see, there was the paraphernalia of winding the clock. Hunts up in the High Street, they had a man that used to come down. Oh, after some time, he came to me and said, look, I shall not be winding the clock anymore. So I said, well, what's going to happen then? He said, I don't know. He said, I'll tell you the truth, I can't go up the ladder. The ladder went up into the cupola. It was quite a height. I could appreciate. Maybe he didn't like going up there. So I took it upon myself. And from the day I left, I still wound that clock. Occasionally, you'd have to put a penny on the pendulum, because the clock would either lose or gain. So we had a dose of coins there, so we used to put a couple of coins on the pendulum to bring it back.
It's fantastic hearing, people's voices, which is one of the great things with oral history. You hear people's stories and expressions. As I said, these are just a couple of clips. We had all sorts of stories that we gathered there, and they were then used as part of a play that Vamos Theatre did when the Hive opened. We used it in exhibitions and things. And Cyril became one of the people who featured in the exhibition that we did. We had a little cartoon at the bottom of the exhibition panels featuring him and particularly his great granddaughter, who was used with a magic iPad, would go back in time and explore the history of the site. And in it, she also chatted to her great grandfather, Cyril. Um, Sadly, Cyril died. I think it was just before the Hive opened, and Josie and Elsie died just a few years later as well. But the great thing about oral history is that those stories and those memories live on for people to listen to hear about, and just to add to that story about what life was like. Um, and the roundhouse that Cyril mentioned, and him sort of winding the clock up for over 30 years, that's a picture of it on the left. As part of the market. We had all sorts of stories about the market, other people used to visit with their family and people. And the corner of it is in the right hand image, and an archaeologist working on. We can see the bit of an angle, and that's part of the foundations of the roundhouse that our archaeologists discovered whilst excavating before the Hive came. As I said, all history, really, this is just one collection. There's numerous other ones. There's about 170 interviews, for instance, our World War II project, which we quite often share on our blog, some of the clips relating to some of the events. Um, Back to an archaeological suggestion. And this is a Bronze Age urn from Clifton Quarry, where we do quite a lot of work. And this was nominated by Laura, one of our illustrators. And this is the sort of find that could easily have been lost. It was in a very, very bad condition, as you might be able to see on the left. It was so crushed and fragile that it was lifted as a block of soil and had to be um, excavated back in the hive and had to be drawn as much as possible. And it was that balance act with how much you can do without it collapsing and disintegrating. So it was quite a challenge to get as much information as we can. And there's a bit of a on the right hand side extracts from the pattern that's on there. So the find staff had a look, tried to see what they could do to make sure it was in the best condition possible. And then on the left, we can see Laura drawing it using a biroscope, which is where you have glass over the top, and she's drawing from there because it is so fragile. It was hard to draw, and then some of the drawings are on the right. She drew with that, and then afterwards she had another go with pencil. But by this stage, some of the bits were disintegrating and going. So it was a bit of a race against time and a balancing act to try and see what we could find. But she says that the whole thing about drawing it, you're actually really looking and trying to see the details and seeing how it was done, and there's all these little details because you wanting to capture those of this pot, which is between 6 and 12,000 years old. So I said he was drawn a numerous times. Sometimes they'll say, why do we draw when we can just photograph? But sometimes in the drawing, you get them more detailed because you're studying at what do we include or not and trying to enhance certain features that will help identify it and be particularly of interest to the archaeologists. And so the pencil and ink drawing are both in the report, the different ones try and get as much information as possible. But it's quite fortunate that we were able to get this particular the drawing thing without it completely collapsing. This type of urn isn't as particularly unusual in Britain, but this one has significance because of where it was at Clifton Quarry. The prehistoric phase falls between the mid-10th and mid-4th century BC, and it's one of the very few unenclosed late Bronze Age, early Iron Age settlements in the English West Midlands. And so it's the only one of its only on site of its type in Worcestershire. And so a pot like this helps to build up what was it like. Um, and it seems to be somewhere of importance. It seems and adding to that and oops, sorry, I thought I had another image after that. Um, yeah, telling us more about that particular site, that rare thing. And as I said, sadly, many of the items that we do uncover during archaeology are the worst for wear. They've been thrown away, they've been buried. And so said Laura nominated this because of her experience of just seeing what looks like, you can say, something that doesn't look much, I think great condition. But it's a few thousand years old, and it does tell an important bit about a story about that particular site and significance that we know can add to the story that's ongoing about what we know about it. I said so that was nominated by Laura partly because of her working on it and getting feeling that she got to know it, and quite a few of the nominations were quite personal as part of because people had worked on them, like Justin with the oral history, Tom with the first one. Um, and it can sometimes the nominations don't jump out, but people nominate them because it answers questions, it answers a puzzle, and it's quite personal to them. Which is the same with people who come in to use us in the Hive. Everybody's looking for something that relates and is important to them. These ones, Stoulton Sales particulars, were nominated by Julia because they helped solve a puzzle. Because there was a Matthew Corbett, who was living in Saltbog, Stoulton, in the 1911 census. Um, when he died, in the parish registers, his place of abode was also put as Salt Bog. But where is it? It's not on any map. She was looking in all sorts of places and could not find anything about Salt Bog. It just, which is not unusual, because people, that's what they call where they live. And we know with Ordnance Survey that they had a list of who you should believe and who you should ask about local information. And local people was right at the bottom. The Lord of the Manor was top, various other people, but the actual people who actually knew the area was very low down, so sometimes these names don't get in there. It's not uncommon that people having to do a lot of studies, right? Where did this person live? I know one lady was trying to do a history of a farm and ended up doing a history of farms in that parish because they changed their names so often it was hard to work it out until she did a sort of a wider study of all the different farms, the names, who was living there, to try and identify which was what, and who was living in there, to find a bit of a timeline for each one. Fortunately, Julia came across a sales catalogue. In 1917, Lord Somers sold his estate, and as part of that, a sales catalogue was produced, and also mentioning who was there, who had the tenancy. And she was glancing in there, and this one mentions the late William Corbett. And he'd moved there in 1908, and it just says a brick and tiled cottage. So it doesn't mention Saltbog, but because his name is there, then that is obviously where he was living. Paying £6 per annum, 3 roods and 31 perches, which is the old formats for land, acres, rods, and perches. And there is a map which shows where all the different plots are, so she could look and see where that particular house was and know where Matthew Corbett actually lived. As I said, it doesn't mention Salt Bog, but able to narrow down, and she wouldn't have found it anywhere else. Also found other buildings relating to other members of his family. Lot 42 was a shop, a grocery shop let to Miss Kate House, which was a relative of Matthew Corbett. So then, by looking wider, was able to pick up various other names and things, and suddenly a whole load of extra information came up alongside the original one that she was finding. And so I think this was done just before we asked for nominations, and so because it helped her answer those questions, that was nominated as her treasure. And finally, um, some watercolours, and this was found within some sketchbooks created by Philip Grazebrook, an architect from Hagley. They're full of pencil drawings of decorative features and designs. Some are from when he was visiting grand houses and medieval churches that he put within those. And yeah, there are various sources and things that we have that don't look particularly good. I mean, you could argue that the Bronze Age urn, if I don't insult some of my archaeology colleagues, doesn't look the nicest. But they have huge amounts of information. Same as our documents. Some of them, they're tight handwriting and they don't look much, but it's the information contained. But we do have some lovely looking ones as well. And these watercolours jumped out, and so my colleague who nominated these, she said she just loved them, and they are beautiful. They are done by the artist, and you get, because we've got his book, you get to know a bit more about him, more than just a picture that he's done. You actually get a bit more about him and looking a bit more about who he is. This is on the back of a postcard addressed to W. Stallard, Edwards, Pierpoint Street, Worcester. Stallard was um, a wine merchant. Used to have a store that was Waterstones and is now a clothes store. Who's the people who in the name escaped me just near Fat Face. Um, And so it said this is just in the front of this notebook. Um, and as I said, this particular one was picked out. These two ships, both of different periods. Where he was when he did them, he didn't know, we don't know. But it's just something that really stands out. And it's just a lovely piece of art. There are also some other notebooks that possibly are to do with him. They were part of another deposit, and originally we thought that it might have been the person who deposited them, Homer E. Fawkes, an architect. But it's one of these situations that when you start investigating, you realise that actually it probably isn't. And for various clues, we think this could be Philip Grazebrook, or else it could have been one of his relatives. It's certainly it's from the Grazebrook family, but lovely, beautiful notebooks. I said linking into the other ones that we saw where it had the watercolor at the start, and it said it's just a beautiful collection of drawings, watercolors, sketches from somebody who is very talented and had a particular eye for detail. So thank you for joining us in our talk. If you are interested, if it's whetted your appetite, then yeah, come along to one of our workshops and events. We have some online at the moment. Check our website, or else you can come to visit us. We have got slightly more restricted openings at the moment due to COVID, but we are relaxing those where we can very shortly. The opportunity again to volunteer with us. There's a little bit on hold, but we hope to be restarting those, and just keep checking out our blog, explorethepast.co.uk, on there, and our social media where we try to share many other stories that we come across to hopefully whet your appetite for what we have within our different collections. Normally, you can come use the Historic Environment Record 2 afternoons a week, local studies and self-service whenever they're open, and the original archives 5 days a week. So we're not quite there at the moment, but we hope to be there very shortly and be back to normal when we're able to. I said thank you for joining us. We hope you found this interesting, and perhaps found out some new things that you didn't know that we had, and possibly whetted your appetite for investigating your own, whatever interests you as well. So thank you much for joining us. Next week we'll have our short lunchtime talk will be about oral history projects. So thank you very much for joining us, and said hope to see you another